He would get off me like I was nothing, like he'd just thrown out the trash. And then she'd come in, not with a hug, not with a word of comfort, but with the blade, the same old razor her father used to shave his face. She didn't clean it. She didn't even look me in the eyes. She'd grab my head and begin slicing off what little hair had grown since the last time. Dry, aggressive, unforgiving. Each stroke of the blade scraped my scalp, left red lines, sometimes drew blood. And when the blade got stuck, when it couldn't move through the knots, she'd spit into her hands, smear it on my head, and keep going. I was 8 years old, and that razor was how she reminded me I was filth. People say that pain has a sound. For me, it was the faint scraping of that metal, the stinging snap of hair being yanked from my skin, and her voice whispering behind it all, "This is what you deserve." I go by Evelyn now, Evelyn Grace Holloway. I'm 53 years old and I live alone in a quiet town in South Carolina. I take care of old people. I feed them, bathe them, listen to their stories. Most days I wear a scarf around my head. On others, I let the bare skin show. Some ask if I've lost my hair to illness. I just smile and say, it's easier this way. But it wasn't always easy, and it wasn't always my choice. I still remember the way the linoleum floor in that old kitchen felt under my feet. Cold, sticky, stained in places no mop could ever fix. There was always a smell in the air. Cigarettes, dust, something burnt that nobody ever cleaned. And in the corner, the broom stood upright, like it was watching. That was my childhood. A place where silence was survival, where screams didn't mean help was coming, and where my own mother punished me not for lying or stealing or disobeying, but for being touched, for being used, for being broken by the man she shared a bed with. My daddy was a long-haul trucker. Everyone in town called him a good man. Steady hands, steady soul, they'd say. He brought donuts to the church on Sundays. He knew everyone's name at the gas station. He was the kind of man who smiled with all his teeth, but never let the smile reach his eyes. My mother was quiet, obedient. She baked pies she never ate and nodded at things she didn't believe. But behind closed doors, she had a ritual, a routine. After he had his way with me, after I'd stopped crying and biting my tongue to stay silent, she'd come in with the towel, the bowl, and the razor. Sometimes she'd say nothing, sometimes she'd mutter a prayer, but she never asked me if I was okay. Not once. I didn't understand it then. I thought maybe that's what mothers did, that maybe this was just how the world worked, that love came with blades. The worst part wasn't the pain, it was the message, the way she'd look at me like I was something that ruined her day, like I had failed to protect her from his anger, like my body was a betrayal to the family name, and that razor was her justice. She never hit me, at least not with her hands, but every time she shaved me bald, every time she pressed that blade against my tender scalp, she carved a scar I would carry for the rest of my life. There was one night I remember more than the others. I had tried to hide. I crawled into the space beneath the sink, curled up next to the bleach bottles and moldy rags. I stayed there for hours. I thought maybe if I stayed quiet enough, long enough, they'd forget I existed. But he found me, pulled me out by my ankle, dragged me back to the bedroom. My hair was long enough to braid. I had been so proud of that. He used it to tie me to the bedpost. When it was over, I couldn't move. I couldn't speak. And then she walked in, holding the bowl, her face like stone. I thought maybe this time she'd stop, that she'd see what he'd done and fall to her knees. But she didn't. She sat on the edge of the bed, dipped the towel in warm water, and wiped the blood from my legs like it was jam on a kitchen counter. Then she said it, the words that still echo in my ears. "Stop crying. You make it worse for yourself." She took the blade and began. Years later, I'd learn about shame, about guilt, about trauma. I'd learn words like survivor and dissociation and internalized blame. But at 8 years old, all I knew was that when the blade touched my head, it meant I was dirty again, that I had failed, that I had tempted him somehow, that I was the one who needed to be fixed. Sometimes I wondered if she hated me, but more often, I thought she believed she was doing the right thing, that by scraping off my hair, she could scrape away the sin, the stain, the part of me that made her husband look at me that way. She never protected me, but she made sure I never forgot. I started associating my hair with pain, even after I was placed in foster care. Even after the court orders and the therapy, I couldn't grow it out. The moment it touched my ears, I'd feel the panic rise in my throat. I'd reach for scissors in the middle of the night. I'd shave it off in the dark, not because I wanted to, but because I didn't know how to feel clean any other way. That's what they never tell you, that some things you carry long after the bruises fade. Some sounds never leave you. For me, it's that scraping, that soft metallic whisper that told me I wasn't worth being loved. Now I do it with my own hands, slowly, gently. I warm the blade. I clean it after each stroke. I moisturize the skin, and I look myself in the mirror, eyes wide open. No one forces me anymore. I do it because I reclaimed the ritual, because the thing they used to shame me is now mine. I don't cry when I do it, but I remember. Every time. The woman who walks through the grocery store with a bare head and a calm smile isn't a statement. She's a memory, a monument to the girl who once begged for someone to see her, someone to stop the pain, someone to ask why a child wore a scarf in July. No one asked. And so the blade kept coming. I grew up in a house that never echoed with laughter. The walls were thin, but somehow still managed to keep the truth in and the rest of the world out. Our home sat at the edge of a cracked road lined with dying trees. The curtains were always drawn, even in daylight. The air smelled like grease, mildew, and something else I could never quite name. Silence wasn't just a habit in that house. It was a rule, a law, a survival instinct. My father was the kind of man who was loved in the community. He wore clean shirts and kept his boots polished. He'd hand out butterscotch candies to kids at the gas station and hold the church door open for elderly women. But at home, he didn't need to pretend. The mask came off the moment he parked his truck and stepped through the front door. People used to say he had a good laugh. I never heard it. What I did hear was the heavy drag of his belt sliding from his loops, the creak of the wooden stairs, the sound of his boots hitting the bedroom floor, one after the other. And sometimes, if I listened close enough, the click of the bathroom cabinet as my mother pulled out the razor. That was the soundtrack of my childhood. My mother was tall, with a posture so straight it looked painful. She wore her hair in a tight bun and never let a strand fall loose. Her hands were always moving, wiping the same clean counter, folding the same towels, scrubbing a spot on the floor that had long since faded. She cooked dinner at the same time every day, cleaned the dishes in the same order, and folded my clothes with corners so sharp it looked like origami. But she never hugged me, never brushed my hair, never asked what I was feeling. The first time I realized something was wrong, I was 6. My father had come home early. My mother looked startled but said nothing. He told her he wanted some alone time with me. Her face didn't change. She just nodded and handed him the key to the basement door. I remember thinking it was strange because no one ever went down there unless something needed fixing. But he told me to go with him, that we were going to play a game. The air in the basement was cold, wet. I hated the smell of cement. He sat me on a mattress that had no sheets. The rest of that memory is made of fragments. His voice telling me to be still, the sound of his breathing, the weight of his body, and then darkness. When I came back upstairs, I was limping. My mother didn't ask why. She pulled out the little plastic stool from the hallway closet, set it in the middle of the kitchen, and told me to sit down. I didn't understand. I thought maybe she was going to fix my hair, but instead, she filled a bowl with water, grabbed a towel, and reached for the old metal razor. She didn't speak, not at first. The blade scraped my scalp, dry and slow. It hurt. I cried. That's when she paused, not out of concern, but annoyance. She spit into her hands, rubbed them on my head to wet the hair, and kept going. When it was done, she wiped the razor on the towel and looked at me with those cold, flat eyes. And then she said it. "This is so you remember what you are." I didn't sleep that night. I lay in bed with a scalp burning from little cuts, too afraid to touch it. I kept thinking about what she said, what I was. I didn't know, but I knew it wasn't something good. After that day, everything changed. My father no longer waited for special moments. He didn't need to ask. He'd come into my room when he wanted and leave like nothing happened. My mother never stopped him. She never looked me in the eyes afterward. She just prepared the razor and waited for her turn. There was one time I asked her why she shaved my head, why she didn't stop him. She slapped me, not hard, not enough to leave a mark, but enough to silence the question. You don't speak to your mother like that. You don't accuse the man who provides for you. You keep your mouth shut and your knees together. That's what she said, word for word. I began to think maybe she was right. Maybe I had done something. Maybe my body really did bring shame. Maybe hair was something only clean girls deserved. Girls who weren't touched in the dark. Girls who didn't make their fathers angry. Girls who didn't make their mothers spit. I stopped asking questions. Over time, I started to see the pattern. Every time something happened, she'd come in with the bowl and the blade. It became a ceremony, like a cleansing, like she was shaving away the sin she saw on me. The hair wasn't just hair. It was a symbol, proof, evidence that I wasn't supposed to be touched. And every time it grew back, she made sure to erase it. Sometimes she whispered things while she worked, words I didn't understand at first, verses from the Bible, twisted and poisoned. Like when she said a woman's hair is her glory, and that I didn't deserve any glory. Or when she told me that God punishes those who tempt his sons. I didn't know what tempting meant. I thought it meant being born. I remember the blood, not from the abuse. That came later. I mean the blood from the razor. She didn't care if she cut me. She never used cream, never softened the blade. When it snagged or skipped or dragged too hard, she just pressed harder. Once she cut deep, right above my ear. It bled so much I thought something inside me had broken. She wrapped my head in an old dish towel, tied it tight, and told me to lie down. I asked if I was going to die. She told me only the ungrateful die early, and then she turned off the light. There were no pictures of me in that house, no drawings on the fridge, no birthday cards or messy finger paint stuck to the wall, just silence, bleach, and shame. Sometimes I wonder what it must have looked like from the outside. A quiet girl, clean house, neighbors nodding hello, church every Sunday, a family that kept to themselves. But inside, there were rituals. A father who used his daughter like an object, a mother who erased the evidence with cold water and steel, a child who learned to stay very still, very quiet, very small. The worst part was how normal it began to feel. The bowl, the towel, the scraping, the sting. It became part of my rhythm, like brushing teeth or tying shoes. I stopped reacting, stopped flinching, stopped crying. I became a ghost in my own skin. Years later, someone asked me if I hated her, my mother. I didn't know what to say. I don't think I ever did. Hate requires energy, anger, fire, and I had none of that left. She didn't protect me, but maybe she thought she was protecting herself. Maybe she believed that if she shaved me clean, no one would look twice. That if she stripped me of softness and femininity, he'd stop wanting me. Maybe she thought the shame would stay locked inside me if she cut it down every time it tried to grow. But it didn't work. And I still feel the ghost of that razor every time I close my eyes. He started calling it correction, said I needed to learn discipline, that a good girl stays quiet and takes what's given, that it was for my own good. At first it was his hand, then his belt, then objects, whatever was closest, a spoon, a shoehorn, a broom handle. But I remember the rodo. That long wooden stick used to push dirty water across the kitchen floor. He grabbed it like it was nothing, like it belonged inside me. I was 9. He told me to strip and lie face down. My body shook so hard my teeth chattered. I begged. I said I would be good. I said I didn't need correction, but he just breathed heavy through his nose and called me a liar. Said I looked too proud, that my spine needed breaking. And then he used the roto, slow, forceful. The edges of the wood were splintered. I bled immediately. My mother stood at the door. She didn't blink, didn't flinch. Her arms were crossed and her jaw clenched. When he was done, she walked away like she'd just watched someone take out the trash. No questions, no towels, no help, just footsteps fading down the hallway. That night, I couldn't walk straight. My legs buckled every time I moved. My underwear soaked in blood. The sheets were ruined. I tried to clean it before she saw. But she did, and she slapped me. Said I made a mess, said I was disgusting, said no decent girl bleeds like that. Then she went to the bathroom, came back with her supplies, and told me to sit on the floor. The bowl, the towel, the razor, again. My scalp was still raw from the last time. I cried before she even touched me. She told me to stop whining, that if I could scream during the night, I could stay still during the day. The blade sliced through the little regrowth I had left. I felt it tear against scabs. It felt like a punishment layered on top of another punishment, like I was being erased piece by piece. Afterward, I stayed curled up on the floor. She didn't help me up. She just wiped the razor clean and left the room. I could hear her humming in the kitchen as she started dinner. Something cheerful, something ordinary, like nothing had happened, like I didn't exist. I remember once I tried to tell a neighbor, Miss Dottie. She lived 2 houses down and always smelled like cinnamon gum. She had silver hair and a shaky voice. One afternoon, I passed her mailbox on the way home from school, limping a little, and she asked if I had fallen. I nodded, but then I added without meaning to, "My mama says I'm always falling." She looked at me closely. She squinted like she could see through my words, and for a second, I thought she might ask more. But instead, she patted my arm and said, "Well, be careful next time, baby." Then she walked inside. The door clicked shut and stayed that way. That was the last time I tried. At home, the rituals got worse. The punishments came quicker. It wasn't just for what I did. It was for what I might do. For breathing too loud. For closing a cabinet too hard. For leaving a smudge on the mirror. Each little thing became an excuse. And every time he was done, my mother made sure to clean the slate. She would bring out the razor like it was a sacred object. Kneel down, part my hair with her fingers, run her palm over my head, then start shaving, always the same direction, always starting at the crown and working outward. She didn't talk much during it, but sometimes she whispered things to herself, little prayers, little curses, like she was exorcising something from me. One day she told me she was doing it for my own soul, that every strand she removed was a piece of my shame, that I needed to be pure again. I wanted to scream. I wanted to tell her I didn't ask for any of this, but I had already learned. Speaking only made things worse. There were nights I stayed awake, just listening, counting steps, watching shadows move under the door, trying to guess his mood by how loud he closed the kitchen drawer. I learned to read the silence. I could tell when danger was coming just by the way the floor creaked. When he wasn't around, the silence was still dangerous. My mother filled it with sharp glances and tighter rules. She started watching me dress, criticized how I walked, said I swayed too much, that my clothes hugged too tight. I was 10 years old, wearing hand-me-downs and oversized shirts. But to her, everything I did was an invitation, a sin. She began controlling my body even when he wasn't touching it, told me when I could bathe, told me how to sit, made me kneel during dinner prayers with my hands perfectly folded. If I moved, she'd grip my shoulder hard enough to leave marks. And then, as always, she would eventually reach for the razor. One day, she took me into the bathroom and told me to look in the mirror. My scalp was covered in cuts. My eyes were swollen from crying. I looked like a stranger. She said, "This is what happens to girls who bring evil into their homes." Then she walked out. There was no recovery, no break between the assaults. They blurred together into one long nightmare with short interruptions for chores and forced smiles at church. I stopped feeling hunger, stopped laughing. I didn't even cry anymore. Not really. Just quiet tremors, dry eyes, a blankness that settled into my bones. I began to feel like my body wasn't mine, like I was some object being used, punished, and cleaned over and over until all that was left was obedience. There was one winter evening when I tried to run, not far, just to the woods behind our house. I didn't have a plan. I just ran barefoot through the snow until my legs gave out. My feet were raw and bleeding. I curled under a bush and stayed there for hours, hoping the cold would do what nothing else could. But she found me, dragged me back by the arm, said I embarrassed her, that I was lucky it was her who found me and not him. That night, he didn't touch me. She did. She stripped me in the living room in front of the fireplace, tied a towel around my neck like a bib, sat me on a wooden chair, and shaved my head completely clean, even the tiny hairs behind my ears. Then she rubbed salt into the skin, said it would keep the demons out. I screamed. That was the last time I had a voice. After that, I stopped talking, not out of defiance, but because there was nothing left to say. I had learned that no one was coming, that the world would keep turning no matter how loudly I bled. In that house, my pain was just another routine, another chore, something to be handled and hidden, like a dirty dish, like a loose thread, something she could scrub away with soap and steel. But no matter how deep she cut, she never reached the part of me that still remembered, that still wanted out. She thought the razor would erase me, but all it did was etch the truth deeper into my skin. My hair never had a chance to grow long. The moment it started curling over my ears, the blade would come out. Sometimes she didn't even wait for the blood to dry. She said it was better to stay ahead of the shame. I stopped asking why. I stopped dreaming about what I'd look like with braids or ponytails. I stopped looking at other girls entirely. It hurt too much. I didn't have friends, not because I didn't want them, but because my mother kept me hidden. She said it was for my safety, that other kids asked too many questions, that I was fragile, that the world was cruel. I knew that last part was true. I lived in the proof of it. By the time I was 10, I had learned to disappear into rooms, to make no sound, to fold myself into corners and avoid being noticed. I had also learned how to anticipate moods. My father's silence meant something worse was coming. My mother's hums while cleaning meant she was angry. And when the house smelled like bleach and onions, it meant someone was going to bleed that night. She stopped calling it shaving. She started calling it purification. Sometimes she'd make me kneel while she did it. Said God watched girls like me closely. Said my hair was a temptation and had to be kept short so I wouldn't become the devil's bait. That Christmas we didn't have a tree. We never really did. But she still wrapped something and left it on the kitchen table with a note. To my daughter, from your mother. It was the only gift I had ever received from her. My hands shook when I opened the box. I thought, maybe for a second, that it would be a doll or a book or a sweater she made herself. Something warm. It was a wig, long, blonde, synthetic. She stood beside me and nodded, said, "This way, you'll look normal." I stared at it for a long time. It smelled like plastic and perfume. She had sprayed it with something floral. My scalp was still scabbing. I had open cuts above my ears from the last session, but she didn't care. She pulled the wig from the box and placed it on my head like a crown. Then she smiled. That tight, forced smile she used when the pastor came over. I felt sick. That night she made me wear it to church. Said we were going to the Christmas Eve service like a proper family. She ironed a dress for me, one I had never worn before. I didn't recognize myself in the mirror. With the wig on, I looked like someone else. Someone untouched. Someone fake. People at church said I looked so pretty. They complimented my mother. Said she was doing a fine job raising a lady. One woman touched my shoulder and said, "You'll break hearts someday." I wanted to scream. I wanted to pull the wig off and shout that it was a costume. That underneath, I was raw and bleeding. But I just stood there and nodded. The wig became a mask. My mother made me wear it whenever we went outside. To the grocery store, to the doctor, even to the mailbox. She said no one could know what I really looked like. That people talked. That gossip was a sin, but curiosity was worse. I started to feel like a doll she dressed and undressed. like an object she shaped to keep appearances intact. At home, the mask came off, and the blade came back. There was no break in the ritual. Even if I wore the wig perfectly, even if I kept my head down, the punishment always returned. She began timing me, told me I had to sit perfectly still for the duration of a hymn. If I moved, she would start over. Some days, she'd choose longer songs. Her favorite was Amazing Grace. I hated that song. It meant more cuts, more burns, more chances for her to say I was unworthy. I tried to make my body numb, tried to escape into myself. I would stare at a crack in the tile and pretend I was far away, somewhere cold and clean, somewhere silent, but in a different way. Sometimes I whispered words to myself just to hear my own voice. Not loud, not enough to be heard, just a murmur, just proof that I was still there. The humiliation extended past the blade. She stopped calling me by my name. She'd say girl or filth or mistake. Once, after she finished shaving my head for the 3rd time in a week, she said, "I should have left you at the hospital." I believed her. I stopped using my name in my head. I became a floating thing, something detached, a presence that followed orders and absorbed pain. The teachers at school noticed the wig. They asked why I wore it. I said it was for fashion. They laughed, said I looked mature. One even called me brave. I didn't know what that meant. I didn't feel brave. I felt like a ghost with someone else's hair glued to her head. No one ever pulled the mask off. No one ever asked what was underneath. The few friends I did have slowly drifted away. One girl invited me to her birthday party. My mother said no, told me I wasn't ready for other kids, that they were wild, that they would ruin the little good left in me. I cried. She shaved me again, told me tears were for the weak, said my roots needed punishment before they grew too deep. Even in sleep, I was not safe. I would wake up to her dragging me from bed, saying I was mumbling sinful things, that God had spoken to her in a dream and told her to purify me. I learned to stay still even in my dreams. I learned how to make myself small in sleep. My hair stopped growing in certain spots. Too much damage, too many blades. She said it was God's way of marking me. She started showing me Bible verses, the ones about shame, the ones about women being silent. She said I was born cursed, that I had her mother's blood, that if I ever grew out of line, it would be the end of our family. I believed her, and somehow, in all of that, I still hoped. I still waited for someone to notice, for someone to say something didn't look right, but they didn't. They saw the wig, the dresses, the quiet girl who smiled on cue. No one saw the scabs, the swelling, the pieces of scalp under her fingernails. I existed beneath the surface, and every time I tried to rise, the razor was there to pull me back down. My scalp was infected. It had started with small sores that stung when I laid my head down at night, but within days, they turned into deep, weeping wounds that stuck to the pillowcase. I didn't tell her. I didn't say anything. I knew she would call it God's punishment. I thought maybe she would stop if she saw the pus, the skibs, the way the skin cracked and oozed when touched. But she didn't stop. She called it weakness, said I was rotting from the inside because of my filth, that the devil had burrowed under my skin. The fever came suddenly. One morning I stood up and the room tilted sideways. My knees gave out and I collapsed on the kitchen floor. I remember the cold linoleum pressing against my cheek. I was drenched in sweat, my breath shallow. For the first time in years, my mother looked worried, not for me, but for what others might see if they had to take me somewhere public. He carried me to the truck like I was cargo. I was too weak to fight, too tired to cry. My head was wrapped in an old dish towel soaked through with yellow discharge. She sat beside me in the front seat, arms folded, face tight. She told me not to speak unless spoken to, that hospitals ask questions, that if I said the wrong thing, she would make me pay for it when we got home. The emergency room was freezing. Fluorescent lights buzzed above us, making everything look sterile and unreal. They made me sit in a wheelchair because I couldn't stand. I was sweating through my clothes, but shivering like I was standing naked in snow. The smell of antiseptic filled the air. I clung to it like it was some kind of salvation, something clean, something that didn't reek of blood and bleach. A nurse called my name. Angela. I will never forget that name. She had a soft voice, but her eyes were sharp. She knelt beside me instead of standing over me. She didn't touch me at first, just looked into my face and asked if I was in pain. I nodded. My mother answered for me, said it was a scalp infection, that I had sensitive skin, that I had been scratching at it. Angela didn't respond. She stood and wheeled me into a small exam room, asking my mother to wait outside. She protested, but Angela insisted, said it was standard procedure. She said it with enough authority that my mother backed off. It was the first time I'd been alone with an adult in years. Angela closed the door and knelt again. She didn't ask right away. She just began unwrapping the towel. Her hands were gentle, but I still flinched. The smell hit us both immediately. Her face didn't change. She didn't grimace or gasp. She just reached for gloves and began dabbing at the wounds with saline. She said nothing for a while. Then she asked calmly, "What happened here?" I couldn't answer. My throat tightened. My mouth went dry. She paused, looked into my eyes and said, "You don't have to say anything right now, but I need you to know that what I see here is not normal, and it is not your fault." I started crying. Not loud sobs, just silent tears. The kind that fall without effort because they've been waiting so long. She held a tissue to my cheek. She never left my side. Then she asked the question that would change everything. "Do you feel safe at home?" I didn't know how to answer that. I had never known what safe felt like. I opened my mouth, but no words came. Instead, I reached for her hand, and I squeezed. Hard. It was the only thing I could do, the only answer I had. She squeezed back. She didn't let go. She told me she was going to get help, that someone else would come in and talk to me, that I didn't have to go back out there. I panicked. I started to shake, I said quietly, "But she'll get mad." Angela leaned in and whispered, "I promise you're not alone anymore." A social worker came in. She spoke softly too, asked me simple questions. My name, my age, who I lived with. I answered each one slowly, carefully. My eyes darted to the door every few seconds. I expected my mother to burst in and drag me out by the arm, but she didn't. After the questions, the social worker left. Angela stayed. She cleaned my head with warm water, wrapped it in clean gauze, and helped me lie back. I must have fallen asleep. When I woke up, a police officer was standing near the foot of the bed, not in uniform, just a man in a brown jacket. He didn't ask me anything. He just nodded when I looked at him, said, "You're okay." That's all he said. I was moved to a different room. Someone brought me juice, a banana, crackers. It felt strange to eat without being watched, to lie under a blanket that didn't smell like mildew. I remember staring at the ceiling tiles, counting them, wondering if this was a dream. Eventually, someone came in and told me they had spoken to my parents, that I wouldn't be going home. Not tonight, not tomorrow, maybe not ever. I didn't feel relief, not at first. I felt fear, a deep, hollow fear, because my entire world had been that house, that routine, that pain. Even if it destroyed me, it was all I knew. Without it, I felt like I was floating in a vacuum. But then Angela came in again. She sat beside me and said, "I want you to remember this moment. This is the first time someone saw you." She gave me a small stuffed bear. Its fur was gray and it had a stitched-up ear. She said it had belonged to her daughter when she was young, that it had brought her comfort during hard times. I held it close to my chest and cried until my body went limp. That was the night something shifted. Not everything changed at once. There would be trials, questions, interviews, medical exams. But that was the night I knew someone had broken the pattern. Someone had refused to look away. For the first time in years, the razor didn't come. No one cut my hair. No one wiped my blood. No one told me I was the reason for the suffering. I was seen, and that changed everything. They told me I'd need time. that healing wasn't a straight line, that it might take years to feel like a person again. But the truth is, I didn't even know what healing looked like. I had never had it before to return to. There was no safe memory, no childhood warmth, no place in my mind I could hide when the nights got heavy. All I had was what they gave me at that shelter. A quiet room, a bed of my own, and silence that didn't carry threats. For the first few weeks, I didn't speak much. The staff tried to be kind, but I didn't trust kindness. I didn't understand it. Every time someone offered me a blanket or a snack or asked if I was okay, I waited for the slap that would follow. It didn't come. And that, in itself, became disorienting. They sent me to therapy. I didn't want to go. The idea of talking about what had happened made me sick. But the woman who sat across from me didn't push. Her name was Miranda. She had curly red hair and always wore blue. She would sit with a notebook in her lap and just wait, sometimes for the entire hour. She told me that silence was a language too, and that I could take as long as I needed. The first time I spoke to her, I didn't tell her about the rodo, or the blood, or the razor. I told her about the wig. I said my mother gave me a wig for Christmas. She asked what it looked like. I said it was blonde, too long. It made me feel like a doll, and I started crying so hard I couldn't breathe. That was the beginning. Little by little the words came. The memories came. The nightmares came harder at first, but so did the realizations. That what happened to me wasn't my fault. That survival had been an act of rebellion. That the parts of me I thought were broken had been holding me together all along. They placed me with a foster family. A woman named Carla took me in. She had 3 dogs and a garden in the backyard, and a voice that reminded me of soft cotton. She never raised her tone, never touched me without asking. She gave me the back bedroom and painted the walls whatever color I wanted. I picked gray. She didn't question it. She just smiled and said, "Let's get started." The first time I shaved my own head, I was 14. I had let the hair grow for a while. It was patchy from the damage, thinner in some spots. I hated looking at it in the mirror. I thought about letting it grow long, proving that I was free now. But freedom didn't come from proving anything. It came from reclaiming what they tried to steal. So I stood in front of the mirror with electric clippers Carla bought me. She didn't ask why I wanted them. She just handed them to me and said, "Let me know if you need help." I didn't. I plugged them in. I took a deep breath, and I shaved it all off. Not as punishment, not as ritual, but as a choice. That was the first time I ever saw myself clearly. No blood, no shame, no forced silence, just me. Years went by. I went to school. I studied nursing because I wanted to be what Angela was to me, a moment of light in a hallway of darkness. I wanted to be the person who said, "I believe you," when the world refused to listen. I never saw my father again. He died in prison 5 years after his conviction. A heart attack. There were no visitors listed on his record, not even my mother. She didn't go to the trial. She didn't fight for custody. She didn't write. She vanished from my life like she had never existed. But her voice stayed with me, in the early mornings, in the scent of bleach, in the cold air that moved across my scalp every time I stepped outside. I don't hate her. I wish I did. Hate is cleaner than the knot she left behind. What I feel is more like an ache, a wound that scabbed over without healing right. I think she was a victim too, not like me, but broken in her own way. That doesn't excuse her. It never will. But it helps me understand why the razor came out of the drawer instead of the hug I needed. Today, I work in a small hospice center in Charleston. I care for people in their final days. I listen to their stories. I hold their hands when the fear comes. And when they ask me why I'm bald, I smile. I say it's a long story. And sometimes, if they ask gently, I tell them a little. I tell them that I used to be shaved as punishment, that my hair was seen as a weapon, that every strand was stripped from me like a confession, and that now I shave it because I like the way the wind touches my skin, because I survived, because I'm still here. I don't cry when I talk about it anymore. Not always. Some days I do. Some days the smell of bleach still takes me back. But now I light a candle. I take a hot shower. I speak my own name out loud and remind myself that I am not what they did to me. I am Evelyn Grace Holloway. I am 53 years old. I am a survivor. I am a woman with no hair and no shame. If you are watching this and you felt invisible, if someone made you believe that your pain is too ugly to speak aloud, I am here to tell you they were wrong. You are not what they did to you. You are what you choose to become. Thank you for giving me your time, for listening to a story most people would rather turn away from. I share it not for sympathy, but because someone needs to hear it. Someone out there is still in the dark, still bleeding in silence. Maybe you, maybe someone you love. Let this be a light. Let this be proof that survival is possible, even when everything else is stripped away. And if you are ready to hear more stories like this, stories of truth, of pain, of survival and healing, there is another one waiting for you now, right here on the screen. From my heart to yours, thank you.